I'm going to start where the paper trail ends and where something else begins. Late July, early August 1895, Chicago, Englewood, 63rd Street and Wallace. In the basement of H. Holmes's building, investigators don't open a trunk. They don't pry a drawer, they sift a stove. Out of soot and grit, they pull a gold watch chain. They pull a garter buckle. Burned, but still recognizable. The report ties those objects to Minnie Williams and her sister Nannie. That's the fact, and once you accept that fact, the story changes shape. Because this isn't just a tale about a strange building. It's a story about access. It's about someone close enough to touch your life, handle your things, and erase the rest. Most retellings start with the maze, the trapdoors, the theatrics. But a stove doesn't feel like a tourist story. A stove feels domestic. It feels like someone had time, privacy, control, so I'm not here to tour the castle. I'm here to answer one narrow question. If Holmes wasn't collecting random visitors, who was he trapping? And how do we know? If you want to understand how a person disappears, you can't start with rumors. You start with what outlives them. Paper, ink, stamps. And when the paper runs out, you start looking for ash. This story has a spine, and you can hold it in 3 objects. A deed. A letter. Ash. A deed controls the future. A letter controls trust. Ash controls the narrative. Follow those 3 things, and the legend gets quieter, while the case gets louder. And stay with me, because the most important turn in this story doesn't happen in that building. It doesn't even happen in Chicago. It happens when a different kind of paper enters the story. Paper a courtroom can't ignore. That's when the legend stops being entertainment and starts being evidence. Now, let's start with the deed. April 13th, 1893. Fort Worth, Texas. A property transfer. Minnie Williams signs over the land to a man named Alexander Bond. The notary stamp on the document belongs to Holmes. On paper, it reads like nothing at all. A buyer, a seller, a seal, a tidy transaction. It looks clean. That's the problem, because then the deed moves. Days later, Alexander Bond transfers the same property to Benton T. Lyman, an alias linked to Holmes's associate, Benjamin Pitezel. The paper changes hands twice before Minnie ever boards a ship. Before any honeymoon, before any happy ending the story wants to pretend was real. You can call it romance if you want, but the timing doesn't read like romance, it reads like machinery. I'm not guessing motive from a mood. I'm reading motive from a document. A deed is a weapon that looks polite. It just changes ownership with a clean line of ink. And when you see that, you start asking a different kind of question. Not who got lost in a hallway, but who got processed. Now we go to the second artifact. The one that still sounds like a person. July 5th, 1893. A letter written by Nannie Williams to her aunt. She calls Holmes Brother Harry. She writes, Brother Harry says, you need never trouble any more about me. She writes, I hope our hard days are over. The tone is calm. The trust is total. If you want the last moment of light in this story, it's there, on the page. And then it goes quiet. After July, there's no verified trace of Minnie or Nannie alive. Accounts disagree on the last sighting. Even that last small fact won't sit still, so I won't build on what won't hold. I'll build on what does. A deed that moves like a mechanism, a letter that reads like devotion, and later a stove that answers with residue. Now the Chicago this happened in. Englewood is working class and crowded. Rooms get rented, people move. Records are thin enough for a disappearance to pass as a fresh start. The World's Fair brought crowds. Later stories use that crowd as an easy answer. But the file I'm working from flags that as myth. It argues the known victims are people Holmes knew, not anonymous fairgoers. So I keep the fair where it belongs. As noise, as cover, not as proof. Now we return to the building because the building is where paper and people meet. It held ordinary businesses, and it hid things that shouldn't be hidden. There's a vault on the second floor, airtight. Police find scratch marks inside. That's not an opinion, it's a detail somebody could photograph. Authorities also find concealed routes and partitions, ways to move someone without passing through obvious corridors. And yes, it sounds like a haunted attraction, but some of it fits something simpler. Holmes didn't pay suppliers. Repossession crews show up and find empty rooms. Hidden spaces hold what should have been visible. So the building can be two things at once: a fraud machine and a place where people disappear. Here's why that matters. If you blame everything on the building, you miss the method. The method isn't a trapdoor. It's access and the permission to use it. A signature you gave willingly. A relationship you trusted. A routine that never looked dangerous until it was too late. Now here's the pattern, in plain language. He gains trust, he gains access, he gets a signature, he isolates. Then the person vanishes. Then he replaces them with a story that sounds normal enough to delay panic. That's the pattern. Now we bring in the first victim arc. The record lets us trace with some confidence. Julia Smythe. Connor. The file places her around 30 in 1891. She's married to Isilius, known as Ned Connor. Their daughter Pearl is about 5. Ned leaves, and that matters. It shrinks Julia's safety net. Julia and Pearl remain in Holmes's orbit. The file describes a likely scenario involving a medical procedure. It's described as likely, not proven. Here's what's firmer. Julia and Pearl are last seen alive just before Christmas Eve, 1891. By Christmas Day, Julia's gone. Pearl is seen with Holmes for the last time. When people ask, Holmes gives different explanations. Julia went to visit a dying relative. Julia ran off. Julia reconciled with her husband. Years later, Ned Connor testifies he never believed Julia would abandon Pearl without a word. A mother can leave a man. A mother doesn't usually leave a 5-year-old behind. Then the building search catches up. The dossier points to reporting in 1895 about bones found in the cellar, including remains described as a small child consistent with Pearl's age and parts of an adult female skeleton. The evidence is partial, but it's physical, and the file is clear about what it can't prove. Julia's death mechanism is unclear, so I won't state a method as fact. I'll state what the record can support. Julia and Pearl disappeared in Holmes's building. Later, investigators report remains consistent with a child and other evidence consistent with a woman's death. Now we pivot back to Minnie and Nannie because their arc carries the cleanest documentary spine. Minnie isn't just a name in a newspaper, she's a woman with assets. That matters because assets generate paperwork, and paperwork creates leverage. The file says Holmes offers Minnie a job as a stenographer. He treats her like a social equal. He proposes marriage. Then he persuades her to transfer her Texas land. On the deed, the fraud is quiet. A signature, a stamp, a clean line of ink. The deed is the first rung. The letter is the second. The ashes are the third. Nannie's July 5th letter is the last warm proof of trust. Brother Harry says you need never trouble any more about me. I hope our hard days are over. Then we return to the basement where trust turns into residue. The gold watch chain. The garter buckle. That isn't a confession. That's what's left when a person gets erased. The file labels the sisters' murders as likely, nearly certain, given the forensic clues and Holmes's shifting stories. It also notes no bodies were recovered, so I keep my wording tight. The objects strongly suggest the sisters didn't leave for Europe. They suggest an effort to erase. The dossier adds a detail that changes how I see the control. A buzzer alarm on the 3rd floor steps, installed so Minnie couldn't catch Holmes moving the way he moved. It's petty, it's intimate. It tells me the control wasn't only about money, it was also about surveillance. Now here comes the part most people don't expect. If you're wondering when this becomes a prosecutable case, it's about to. Because the story stops being local, it becomes financial, it becomes trackable, it leaves Chicago. September 1894. Philadelphia, Benjamin Pitezel is murdered within an insurance fraud scheme. Coroner findings shift the case from fraud to homicide. Insurance paperwork becomes the engine. And that paper trail pulls in a criminal named Marion Hedgepeth. The file says Hedgepeth is promised money, feels cheated, and tips authorities. That tip helps direct investigators to Holmes. November 17, 1894. Boston, Holmes is arrested on a Texas horse theft warrant. At the moment he's taken, police think they've got a swindler. Then Detective Frank Geyer takes over the part of the story that stays in my throat. He doesn't chase legend. He chases addresses, hotel registers, witness interviews, names, dates, rooms. This is what turns rumor into fact, and it's not cinematic. It's repetition. A clerk remembers a man and a child. A register matches a date. A train ticket points to the next city. The trail narrows because paperwork narrows it. July 15, 1895. Toronto. Gaia and Toronto police recover the bodies of Alice and Nellie Pitezel. Shortly after, in Indianapolis, investigators find charred bone fragments and children's teeth in a stove, identified as Howard Pitezel. Once children are found, the Chicago disappearances stop looking like gossip. They start looking like a pattern that has already killed. That changes the pressure on the building. Chicago searches Holmes's property in late July and early August 1895. And that's when the stove speaks again. Ashes, bone fragments, personal items. The file lists Minnie's watch chain, Nannie's buckle. The press is invited, and the file warns that this is where exaggeration grows. So I separate two things, what's verified and what got built on top of it. Verified is the jewelry in the ashes. Verified is the scratch marks inside the vault. Verified is hidden spaces and odd routes. Myth is the idea of a building-wide death machine designed for tourists. The record doesn't need that. The record already has a deed, a letter, an ash. Holmes is tried in Philadelphia, November 2, 1895. A guilty verdict for Benjamin Pitezel's murder. And now Holmes does what people like Holmes do. He tries to control the story. He produces confessions that don't behave like evidence. Many named people were later found alive, so I treat his confessions as performance. If I use his words at all, I use them only as a window into how he wanted to be seen. I was born with the devil in me. It's theatrical. It's self-myth. May 7, 1896, Moyamensing Prison in Philadelphia. Holmes is on the scaffold. He says, "Don't bungle, that line's small, procedural. It belongs to a man who thinks the world is a series of transactions, even at the end. Now I'll close with what I can prove and what I can't. I can prove Minnie Williams signed away her Fort Worth property on April 13, 1893, to a man who didn't exist, notarized by Holmes. I can prove Nannie Williams wrote a letter on July 5, 1893, calling Holmes' brother Harry, writing, 'I hope our hard days are over.' I can prove physical evidence later tied Minnie and Nannie to burned items in Holmes's basement stove. I can prove Julia Connor and Pearl vanished around Christmas of 1891, and later reporting describes remains consistent with a child tied to Pearl's age. I can't prove the final timeline down to the hour. I can't prove an exact killing method. I can't prove where the full remains of Minnie and Nannie went. But I can tell you where the case turns. It turns on the hinge between disappearance and murder, and that hinge is evidence. If I could have one record to collapse uncertainty the fastest, it would be the cleanest chain of custody for what came out of that basement stove, from recovery through identification. Because that's the moment the story stops being theory and becomes a case. Now here's the final image I want you to hold. Not a hallway, not a trapdoor, not a maze, a notary stamp pressed into paper, ink drying while a person is still alive, a letter that sounds like trust, and then, years later, a stove full of ash. That's how this story really moves, through paperwork, through access, through the quiet tools of control. So here's the question I'll leave you with. If all you had was the April 13th deed and the July 5th letter, would you call this a love story or a fraud case, and why? And what, in writing, would you need to stop calling it either and start calling it murder? Subscribe to Forbidden Origins so you don't miss the next file when it lands. Next time, we stay in Chicago, but the trail moves from ash to money, from a basement stove to a city that learned how to look away. And this time, the story doesn't hide. It runs in plain sight.